Hi, thank you for choosing this video to watch. Recently, a friend asked me about all this equipment, and I thought I'd make a video about it, just kind of detailing what it is. So there's not going to be much music. I'll probably just be talking and pointing at things, and maybe I'll demonstrate the sounds a little bit. But basically, if you're interested in that, I will go through each one of my modular synthesizer components, and I thought it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about why I have it and what it does, right? So if you're new to modular synthesis, then you might be interested in listening to this. It's not structured. I'm going to ramble, so if you need a structured discussion, then maybe there'll be other videos elsewhere for that. But right now, I'm just going to take the camera and point it at the stuff and talk about it. So I'm going to start with this row of components of the modular synthesizer. I have other things too that I'll talk about later, but this I think deserves a lot of attention. So I have basically two versions of this. I'll tell you why in a second, but basically, for those of you who are not familiar with modular synthesizers, this generates a tone and then modifies it and then sequences it into just a sequence of notes, like a melody. And then you can put some reverb effects on it and send it out through a mixer. So that's how you make sound with this collection of knobs and jacks. So in detail, we're looking at the Tromso made by Bastel. It's an oscillator, which basically you turn this knob up, it makes a higher tone. You turn this knob down, it makes a lower tone. These two knobs have to do with attenuating that signal in different ways. And these jacks here are extra jacks. This is not only an oscillator, it's also a sample and hold, and there's a comparator in here too that I rarely ever use. Next to it is a filter. And what a filter does is it takes the signal from this oscillator, this tone that it generates, and you can just turn a knob and filter out certain frequencies. Maybe you want to filter out the low frequencies, so you just hear kind of a high tinny voice, or you filter out the high frequencies and you just hear kind of a low muffled voice. And that's your decision, because you want to make your music sound a certain way to express a certain mood. So that's what all these knobs are for. They're basically just to control that signal. And also this specific module of filter includes different ways of controlling it without twisting a knob. You can actually use a jack. Let's say plug this jack here into this next module, which I will discuss, and this module will in effect turn that knob with a sort of a sine wave type signal, and the signal that this will send out will be, actually it's not from this jack, it's from down here, but it won't be audible. It'll just be an electronic signal. That's why it's called a VCF. It's called voltage controlled filter. So this is sending out a voltage signal. So this module is made by a company called Make Noise, and they've named it Maths. And it's a multifunctional module. Basically, it's a way of controlling the voltage of any number of modules. You turn a knob, you turn up the voltage, and if they have several different knobs, you can kind of shape that voltage to parameter you want. So this is a complex thing to explain, but it's basically just a control module. So next to it is the mixer, and this is just like a mixer for any kind of electronic component. You know, you take a signal here and a signal here and a signal here, and these are the inputs, and this is the output. You just send it out to your speakers, and this is what you use to control the volume of what you hear. So I put that in the center because all these modules eventually kind of feed into this in one way or another. Now next to this is, it's called a VCA. It's a voltage controlled amplifier. This works in together with the sequencer that I have. So I'll talk about these three together. The sequencer is the way you create a melody. Each one of these little knobs creates a different, well, you control the voltage with these knobs, but the voltage creates a different tone. The higher the voltage, the higher the frequency of the tone. So it steps through these in just a regular over and over pattern.
So when the sequencer steps through its series of voltages, causing the oscillator to make musical notes, what we hear is one continuous melody. They're all connected, all the notes are connected, unless we control that signal with the VCA. This is a voltage-controlled amplifier. In its simplest form, this module will turn on and off a sound coming from the oscillator by using another signal. So when I apply that same clock signal that's stepping the sequencer, it has the effect of pressing a piano key. Now I'll demonstrate that later.
Basically, it's this sequencer, this VCA, and this oscillator that make the tones you hear in the patch that I create next. This is sort of a companion to the sequencer. A lot of times I can't actually find the right tone. You just kind of, these are tiny little knobs. And if you just push it just a little bit that way, you lose your tone altogether and it sounds out of tune. It's like singing a Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with one wrong note. It's bad. So this will kind of latch those tones. Well, it deals with voltages, but it latches the voltages to known scales. So it's called a quantizer. It's by, who's it by? Oh, well, I'll put it on the screen. It's right here. And it's called the Penrose, named after, I'm assuming, the famous mathematician. So next to it, on either side, are mults. And what a mult is, this mult is a passive, this is a buffered mult. What you do, basically, is you can take this little jack from the oscillator, stick it into one of these jacks, and you will have that same note coming out of three other jacks. So it's a way of getting your signals to different areas, and that just, it makes it more accessible. You don't always want to use the same oscillator tone, but a lot of times you want to use the same voltage. Like there's a clock that you want to make control your sequencer and your VCA. You only have one jack for your clock usually, so you plug in one jack from your clock here and two come out to these two different components. So the only difference between the passive and the active buffered is that these jacks are just stuck together. So if you have well, this is good for voltages, but it's not so great for audio. If you have an audio signal and you want to multiply it 3 times, you'll kind of lose a bit of that signal because you're just losing energy. That's what this is for. You put a jack into here and you'll get 3 exact copies because this is connected to the electrical supply. These are just stuck together. So I made that one myself. And this is a clock divider. And as you see, you divide by 1 through 8 steps. So I'll talk about the clock in a second, but if you take a clock signal, which is a regular pulse, and you plug it into here,
the module will generate a half-speed pulse at this connection where it says 2. And that pulse is incrementally slower at each of these other ports. So in practice, I'd set up a fast pulse here at the clock and use its various divisions from here to make, let's say, a syncopated harmony.
So this is a good utility module for taking one clock pulse and using it in different ways. That way you can have 2 sequencers running, one at this rate and the other in a much slower rate with a different voicing. So it's just a way of making your this whole setup a lot more useful. Finally, at this end is the IntelliGel Spring Ray. It's a reverb module, and this is sort of like the amplifier that you plug your signal in, and then it sends it through. You can't see them because I put them in little boxes, but best not do that. Inside of these boxes are spring reverb tanks. So here's an example of what it looks like inside. This is an actual spring, and on one side you have the signal coming in, and it actually sends that audio signal all the way through to the other side. So you need a pretty good amplifier to amplify that signal to get it all the way through. This is an enormous one, like that. So I think I'll patch up something right now just to demonstrate the sequencer and the VCA, and then I'll move on to this. This is the most basic sound you can hear, right? And you can see down here this little red light. See this little red light going around. Each one of these knobs is controlling a different tone so that you hear it. Right? And I can also change the length of the tone with the VCA. Right? Or I can do it this way. Now they're all connected. Each one of these tones is connected. I kind of like that one. So over here on the filter, I can change the way those tones sound. I like that tone there. right? So that's the most basic function of it. I'm using one of these jacks here in the maths as the clock. You can see the little yellow light, and I can increase or decrease the pulse time, the pulse width, and or the time that between each pulses by just turning that button here. You can see it, right? Very slow. Now, the last one over here, up here, is the reverb. Makes you sound like you're in a room because it's reverberating. And there's different ways of playing with it there, here too. Okay? So that didn't probably sound very interesting, very repetitive, and I played this for my brother just recently, and he was bored stiff because unless you're the one twisting the knobs and figuring out all these little corners where the sound makes really interesting timbres, it's not really interesting to listen to until you get to, well, playing with maths. And this is, I mean, the manual just goes on, and there are a lot of tutorials online explaining how to use these. It's basically just a logic. So you're using different logic paths to manipulate the pattern of the pulses. That makes it very interesting. It helps if you have another oscillator and then another filter. So what I have been doing, let's switch up a little bit. So what I've been doing is I've been trying to make my own modules because I want to know how this stuff works from the inside out. And I found when I started making modules based on schematics I found on the internet, that I really needed to have a working module to know what it's supposed to sound like. So that's why I bought all of these expensive little gadgets. This was my training setup, and this is very useful. And in fact, I've made a bunch of things that could probably replicate this, but it's in a much larger format. It takes up a lot more space on my table, and it's not as reliable because I'm not a great electronics engineer. So that's why I have this skiff. Oh, this little box here is what they call it, a skiff, because it looks like a little boat, I guess. But after I got this together, I realized, as I was saying, it's much more interesting when you can get two voices at least and two different sequencers running at the same time. So I made this box, and it's basically a copy of this, but they're made by different manufacturers. And I included some of my own creations in that one too. Most of the stuff has been DIY, like they send you a kit and you solder it yourself, so at least you have some idea about what's on the inside. The maths was not a DIY kit, but most of the other ones were. The Delpher wasn't. So I'll show you this other box I made. And this one I made with the intention of taking out into the world and playing as a musical instrument, or demonstrating how synthesizers make sound. And I also had this idea watching Jade Rose that I wanted to be able to demonstrate this to organizations like in Omaha we have a place called Do Space, or the Omaha Public Library, so that they could build their own synthesizer room. I really think that's a great idea. So that's what this was intended for. Right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, so yeah, I put that on hold. But let me show you this. So this box I'm quite proud of. I made it myself out of plywood anyway. And I made it so that it latches on the side so I can carry it around. And I also made it also with the idea that I could set it up together with this one, so it's, you know, I can work them together. So this is basically the same thing. Let's zoom in. Zoom in. So here, basically the same setup. Here's the oscillator. Here's the filter. Here's the mixer. Here is the VCA and the spring reverb driver. And here's another mult. This is a buffered mult. So, oh, here's a divider. Did I say divider? There's a divider right there. So, the only difference is this little nerd by Bastel. This is basically a clock module. It serves the same function as the maths, but it's very much simpler, and it's a little more complex. I have to keep their instruction manual nearby because you operate it by looking at the color of the LEDs. It has a different modes you have to access by pushing buttons. But it does. It's another logic module, so that you can change the pattern of the notes. The only thing this is missing is a quantizer and a sequencer. So what I've done is I purchased this. Oh, it's dusty. This little Korg SQ1. There it is. This is a battery-operated sequencer that you can actually plug it into several things at once. But that's what I use. Well, I use this for various things. But that's where the sequencer is. Oh, I'm missing look at that. I'm missing a screw. Huh. So I'll put a little patch onto this and see what I can make. Okay, you can hear this sequence that this is turning out. I'll focus in on this little sequencer here so you can see a little better. Here's the old sequence that's been going on. I modified it a little bit to make a better melody, but then I added that sequence, and you can see that it's in time, but it's at a different pace because I'm using these different logic patterns from Little Nerd. If you see, it's getting, oh, can you see it? I'll get up closer. It's getting that regular clock. Dum, 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 dum. But it's changing it according to the dials. So it's sending out this little signal to this oscillator and this VCA. So if I add it, here, let's turn this down so I can turn this up. Watch that. This clock is being controlled by this little nerd. And that little nerd is being controlled by that clock. So they're both in sync. But this provides some counterpoint. So when I add them together, sounds good. So just a couple things to add while I'm doing this. Instead of sending this directly to a speaker, I'm sending it to a mixer so I can add other things besides this little guy. And this mixer is just a big version of this little guy. You know, just like several different inputs and one output. And my speakers are right up here. Those are my speakers. Coming out of that mixer right there. Right? So it's time to talk about the mixer and the other stuff. So the mixer is sending a monitor signal up to the speakers and also sending a stereo signal over here to my my little portable digital recorder. So when you hear good sounds coming out of your speakers, it's because I'm recording this whole thing at the same time as I'm recording it through the microphone on top of the camera, which is what I'm speaking to you through right now. Now, besides that stuff, I also have a conventional keyboard and a conventional drum machine, which I built. I'm just going to show off my case. I built this case for it. It's called the Timberwolf. And so I cast little wolf heads out of brass myself. I made those. And I also I carved a little flying wolf there into the side with straps so I can carry this around. And also I made a sliding drawer so I could play my little drum machine, also made by Akai, called the MPC 500. So I don't use this as much because it's not easy. It's not easy. But this is very easy. This is a very easy keyboard to play. It sounds good, very mellow. I've recently purchased a guitar pedal called the Dusk, which is a filter, very similar to the filter that's over there. So when I turn up this howl button on the Timberwolf and then feed this through the Dusk, it has a really nice tone. I won't play that for you right now. The other thing, where is it? What should I say about it? Oh, so this is the main setup. This is what I play music with. Now, I have more stuff that I've made, and I just can't figure out how to play it, and I can't figure out how to fit it into the system. I'll just briefly show it to you. Gerp. So this is my version of Maths. It's a logic module, and as you see, it's very dusty. I did anodize this aluminum panel and dyed it purple myself. And there's Mary Anning, the famous fossil hunter. So this does the same thing as Maths, basically. Over here is my collection of other things that I've made. I'll bring these out. I am going to make a video, as I promised Joshua, to include all what we call the junk modules, the stuff that we don't always use. So I'm going to be using a bunch of these. This one is Look Mum No Computer Big Button, but I've adapted it to my own use. This is a fun little thing. It's basically just a wave trigger, but I put a bunch of buttons on there so I can play it like a keyboard. And this is a test case that I've made. It's got a very attractive side. Here, that's how you turn it on. Bunch of stuff in there that I made myself, except for this stuff for VCO, which is kind of broken. And then the cabinet full of devices that I've made. And what is this? I don't think I've used this. See, these are the things I have to pull out and just play them, because there are some very neat things in here. Here's my very first DIY project, inspired by DIY guy Nikas Maria. It's just a little resistive touch controller, and there's a video about this on my channel. And here's my water, my aquaphone, bunch of stuff. I did a bunch of stuff, cool stuff. And I'm thinking, there's been other videos on my channel using this TV. I'm going to take this out, and when the light goes down, it's very light outside right now, but when the light goes down, I'm going to plug my synthesizer into this TV and make some electrons dance. Some electrons dance on the phosphorus screen. So that's it. Wait, there's two more things that I've begun playing with. Sarah Michelle made this sequencer. It's a standalone sequencer, so I can't sync it up to the other stuff. And this is the Glitch Storm, which I just made a couple videos with. It's a fun little device, and I made this little case for it. That's what this is. So anyway, that's the end of that, and I'll just make some more music for you, and I'm gonna fade into the TV screen.
Mm-hmm.